I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Nir Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies.
Dr. Hughes, good afternoon.
So good to be with you again for our intellectual tete-a-tete.
Intellectual tete-a-tete. And the subject of our tete-a-tete today is the administration's new AI action plan, which is making waves and is the formulation of the administration's policies on AI. So what do you think?
Well, just to set the stage a little bit, I think that when Trump first got into office back in January, he issued an executive order that said that the administration would be looking at all regulations that interfered or constrained AI development in an attempt to roll them back, and targeted specifically Biden's executive orders on setting guardrails for AI. So there was a deregulatory intent to what they were doing here. They pulled in David Sachs as a special advisor for AI and crypto. David Sachs is a close associate of Thiel and Musk and South African, and has been, on the right wing Silicon Valley leadership. So the intent, I think, was to establish a new course. I think what's surprising is that there's still so much in it that we would agree with, or that we, meaning Democratic or left of center AI folks, would agree with in terms of AI workforce development and things like that. But there's huge contradictions in some of the positive things that they say they want to do, and how you're going to do it. Are you really going to do it? And those kinds of things. But the president released this week the AI action plan and also issued 3 executive orders. The 3 executive orders were accelerate federal permitting, promote AI exports, and woke AI in federal government. But we're going to talk mostly about the AI action plan and how it relates to everything else. I would say that there's also an intent with this to respond to Europe, because the European Union has had GDPR, Digital Services Act, Digital Marketing Act, and now the AI Act. And all of those acts have targeted American AI companies or AI digital services in ways that they complain bitterly about, and that Vance and others have said is a restriction on America's free speech. That any attempt to tell Facebook what to do in Europe is a restriction on free speech.
Right. So let's just very broadly survey what's in it. And I agree with you that there's a surprising level of matter-of-factness, competence here. Large parts of my sense is, we can talk about whether you agree or not, but large parts of this are almost mainstream in the sort of American broader economic approach to technology. If it wasn't done by the Trump people, I almost see that this could be close to being a bipartisan declaration, or at least large parts of it. But before we get to that, by means of overview, it has 3 pillars. One pillar is largely focused on what the document calls accelerate AI innovation. And that one is all about deregulation, about putting an emphasis on open models and open weights. So AI models that are easily shared across industries and between geographies. Removing or trying to filter sort of DEI content, which is one of the or so-called woke AI. So trying to make sure that the models don't come up with answers that the administration sees as ideologically tainted. So that's one kind of pillar. The other pillar is all about infrastructure and making sure that we can accelerate the building of the power infrastructure that's required for these, but also encouraging a whole set of jobs that would support that infrastructure. So kind of AI-related maintenance industry. And then the third is about AI diplomacy, and that's about essentially limiting what the Chinese can get and getting everything that we have to most of our allies so that most of the world operates on an American AI infrastructure. So that's the big picture overview of what's in it.
Yeah, and as you say, with the exception of some of the items like woke AI, it kind of depends on how you do it. And with this administration, it's like a beautiful document and a beautiful plan doesn't necessarily translate if it's a shambolic administration that's already destroyed half of the federal government. So
yeah.
But
so
we'll
maybe that's
get into
the
some
first,
of those details.
Yeah. So that's actually one of the most, I think, significant things to think about. I mean, I guess there's some ways in which, from my own perspective, I take issue with the document and I don't think it's beautiful, but I do think it's competent, and I do think it doesn't look like somebody throwing paint at the wall, which sometimes the administration's policies do look like.
Well, the part that you reacted to immediately was the declaration that AI is a revolution. And
yeah.
I guess I had left that out of my notes because I do think AI has revolutionary potential. But why don't you expand on that?
Yeah, so the thing opens on the very first page, right? It opens. This is actually worth reading, the paragraph, because I think a lot of what's both problematic and interesting about the document is the way that it frames the whole preoccupation with AI and the centrality of AI in our economic and political future. And that has two legs. One is to view it as this kind of revolution, and the other is to analogize it to the space race. And just like we had to win that, the document says we have to win the AI race. But let's start with the revolution. So it says, and we'll link to the document in the show notes, but the document says, winning the AI race will usher in a new golden age of human flourishing, economic competitiveness, and national security for the American people. AI will enable Americans to discover new material, synthesize new chemicals, manufacture new drugs, and develop new methods to harness energy. That's an industrial revolution. It will enable radically new forms of education, media, and communication. That's an information revolution, and it will enable altogether new intellectual achievements, unraveling ancient scrolls once thought unreadable, making breakthroughs in scientific and mathematical theory, and creating new kinds of digital and physical art. That's a renaissance. So industrial revolution, information revolution, and renaissance, which is synonymous with cultural revolution, not in the Chinese sense, but in the descriptive sense.
Who knows? We may get to the Chinese one too.
Yeah. that'll put you in a good mood. But, as a descriptive point, I just want to say the Industrial Revolution, the Information Revolution, and the Renaissance were all described as such retroactively with the insight, with the benefit of historical insight.
With a couple 100-year wars tucked in there.
Right, exactly. And those were sort of historically informed determinations that a series of processes deserve to be a revolution. This has reversed the order and has already decided that it's a revolution, even though most of the benefits that are described haven't. Some of them have come to pass, but most of them haven't. And so in that sense, this insistence that AI is already a revolution, to me, kind of surrenders / reflects the hype cycle in Silicon Valley, which has its fingerprints all over the document. So that's what I meant by that point. I don't see an AI revolution yet. That needs to be proven rather than declared.
I mean, I'm not as worried by this aspect of the report, because if this had been from the Rubber Manufacturers of America, it probably would have said the same thing. You know, the potentials for the and future of rubber is going to transform American industry or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a little bit of hype at the beginning is to be expected. And this is the hottest technology topic right now.
Yeah. But no, you know, people can say whatever they want about rubber. Nobody is going to sort of, because of hyping rubber, channel all the country's resources, talent, and excitement to rubber. And with AI, that is happening. And I think in some ways happening prematurely. And by the way, this is not, to be fair, this is not a critique necessarily of the Trump administration's document. It's a critique of the kind of influence that Silicon Valley is able to exert more broadly. I mean, by the way, same day that this was released, Anthropic, who until recently were the sort of most ethical AI lab, released a document that is essentially a carbon copy of this.
Yes. And probably timed at the same time. I think Dario Amodei at Anthropic was trying to get ahead of criticism last week. He said that he was going to have to start going on bended knee to the Gulf states for money, and which he described as authoritarian money. But in order to build out AI, baby, we have to compete with the Chinese. We need to get that authoritarian money.
Yeah. So, you know, I think Dario did not cover himself in glory with any of that, because painting the Gulf states with a broad brush is silly. You know, some of them more authoritarian than others, not to mention that there's a very long history, bipartisan history of commercial collaboration with them on the one hand. And on the other hand, it seems like much of the talk of carefully evolving AI rather than running wild with it has been abandoned by Dario and his lab, and they've kind of straightened up with the document.
That's one thing to say about the whole document, is that it still reflects the deregulatory push that because of our global competitive situation, we shouldn't have anything that gets in the way of, you know, including environmental protection, which part of this is calling for permitting reform, which is interesting. We can talk about it in relationship to the abundance debate. But it's not really deregulatory in the sense that if this free speech part of it, if the ideological bias part of it, it depends on how they play that. You know, if it's simply a matter of saying, you know, we don't want people relying on DeepSeek because DeepSeek lies to you about Tiananmen Square, which it does. I understand that. That's legitimate concern. But if that then says, well, if a model doesn't say that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, then it's ideologically biased and we're going to take moves against it, then that's a problem. So there are some aspects of this that are not deregulatory, but they just don't, they never express what the regulatory mechanism would be or the penalties for any of it, except for not having the federal government buy it.
Yeah, let's get to the woke AI stuff and whether or not that is regulatory and whether or not that's even something that can be regulated in a minute. I want to stay for a minute in this question of framing, because I think actually that is important. And it's a problem that goes beyond just the document. So I guess my issue with the revolution rhetoric was, you know, that's a way of framing something, right? Framing this technology as revolutionary. And if it's accepted that it's revolutionary in some way, you give up the farm, because then also the kind of AI inevitability argument starts working if it's a revolution.
And the geopolitical competition part of it.
Right. So if you accept that it's a revolutionary technology, then, you know, of course you can't stay out of the revolution or you get run over by it. You can't, you know, keep this out of the universities or keep this out of the schools. You can't sort of do any sort of pushback that asks, you know, is this good for us or not? And in the meantime, I guess I'm just not convinced that it's so revolutionary yet. We've talked about this before. It can unfold proteins. That's amazing. I'm pretty sure that it's going to be revolutionary in medicine and in biology. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Whether or not it's going to be revolutionary in business is an open question, and that may take 30 more years until it is, kind of like it took the internet a very long time until that had a revolutionary effect on business. And so that's sort of one kind of aspect of rhetorical framing that I want to highlight. Another, which is related, is in that same set of opening paragraphs. This is framed as the 21st century's space race that we have to win, and that again brings up a whole set of associations. It was existential, supposedly, to win the space race against the Russians, although I don't think it was. But at the very least, you could tell if you won that space race or not. Either Neil Armstrong was on the moon first, or some cosmonaut was on the moon first, and then you won, right? But here, I'm not even sure. Like, what does it mean to win the AI race with the Chinese, for example, which is what's at stake? Like, how would you know? Would it be like the first model that passed a bunch of benchmarks for AGI or superintelligence? Would it be being able to build a cheap open weights model that passed as many benchmarks that an expensive different model passed? Because if that's the case, the Chinese already won the AI race with DeepSeek. So,
well, there's no discussion in this document about AGI or ASIs, artificial superintelligence or general intelligence. Those concepts are just absent. And as a consequence, there's no serious discussion of technological unemployment. There's some discussion of worker retraining. There's no discussion of other kinds of catastrophic risks that might result. Techno-authoritarianism certainly is not addressed. The document is intentionally trying to say that the winning is expanding the American capacity to sell our technology stack, as they call it, to other countries, and having the rest of the world be reliant on American artificial intelligence. That's where,
yeah.
And that's framed by DeepSeek having come out of the box in January with a model that was 1% as costly in terms of energy, and given away for free.
I guess that's my question to you is, do you think that this description of the AI international environment as a AI race is coherent? A race kind of suggests, discrete competitors doing their thing discreetly. So, when we were developing the technology that took us to the moon, we did it pretty much in parallel with the Russians. We tried to spy on them. They spied on us. We brought over some Nazi rocket scientists and installed them in New Jersey because we thought that, it was so important to win it. The von Brauns, etc., and their ilk, as W.H. Auden calls them. But anyway, you could say two powers trying in parallel and kind of in secret to do the same thing, and one gets there first. But here, the whole thing is so enmeshed, right? The Chinese are copying what OpenAI does, and then OpenAI, copies what's been copied from them and advanced on them. So the whole race thing, my sense is, and maybe I just don't know enough, but my sense is the whole race metaphor for this, which is competitive and adversarial, collapses if you push on it, doesn't it?
I'm not sure it does. I've been a longtime critic of China, of their authoritarianism. Their technology model, however, their technology development model has been, as everyone knows, startlingly successive. It lifted, a fifth of the world's population out of poverty over the last 30 years, and established Chinese innovation and leadership in lots of different technological fields.
Yeah.
In the case of artificial intelligence, it's been a decade-long part of their official planning that not only would private sector development be encouraged, but also the People's Liberation Army would attempt to innovate in artificial intelligence, certainly in cyber warfare capabilities and spying capabilities. Yeah. I mean, the Russians are far more annoying at the stuff that they do, but the Chinese are far more capable. So I think there is a geopolitical threat. I think there's a technological threat.
I'm just saying the technology is a lot easier to copy than physical technology is, isn't it?
Yes, except, the DeepSeek, and you can install DeepSeek locally and it won't communicate outside of your box. But if you go to DeepSeek, any DeepSeek portal, it's communicating with Beijing. So to the extent, and this is why some governments have already banned DeepSeek, is that they don't want people relying on a Chinese tool that is sending information back to Beijing. And this is the same debate about TikTok. So I do, I think all of that's true, but I just have to confess that after Trump got elected, my hostility and single-minded focus on defeating Chinese authoritarianism took a 90-degree turn because suddenly the U.S. became the principal promoter of authoritarianism in the world.
So now you just want to defeat everybody.
I know. I just want to defeat all governments. I'm an anarchist now.
There you go.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that American AI dominance is in line with my values anymore. I would much prefer a European-led AI renaissance.
Yeah. I guess I'm just making a separate point that I'm not sure that the concept of AI dominance is coherent, just philosophically and epistemologically, because DeepSeek is based on copying parts of American developed large language models. And then American large language models who will want to make the next step in being open weight and open source are going to copy the innovations of DeepSeek that is already a copy of American innovations, and on it goes. And that was less the case in the space or in the nuclear race.
This is what's puzzling about the document's advocacy for open source, is that not only, in the first place, it was a debate within the industry because OpenAI, I think, used to advocate for open source and then went to proprietary modeling. And Meta was open source with Llama, but now they're moving away from that. I think most of them are beginning to see that open source may not be. Open source is good if you're a competitor against the big guys, because then people like something free and transparent, and you may be able to sell them additional services on top of that, or an innovation pipeline on top of that. So yeah, I think the open source advocacy sits weirdly here, because as if you're trying to get these guys to give their stuff away, then the Chinese are immediately going to reverse engineer it. They already have figured out how to reverse engineer it, so it's not that weird. Also, although this is a very nationalistic document and has a lot of nationalistic tones, Trump just approved the sale of high-end NVIDIA chips to China. Must be some part of their trade negotiations. So it's not clear that this is really that anti-Chinese. What they would like is China to use American stuff, which they have been doing for a very long time.
Yeah. So just to kind of package and repeat one of the key points that you just made, there's a tension between encouraging open source AI technology, which is easier for others to obtain, and
national security concerns.
If it's open source, it's easier, and open weights, it's easier for the Chinese to get and play with.
Just on the national security part, I am not disturbed. I think probably some liberals would like, why are you talking so much about the Department of Defense and integration with the military and all that? I'm not disturbed by that. I think it's inevitable that the military should have as much access as everybody in private industry does. And there are some ideas about making cybersecurity more of a focus that make eminent sense, since we know that Russians and Chinese and others have penetrated critical systems in the United States in the past. It was weird to me that there was a single-minded focus on automating the DoD. Why not automating the entire federal government? You already had DOGE in there trying to do that. But there was a couple lines where they say they want to specifically automate the DoD, and it's like, of all the different functions of the government that people are most anxious about automating, I think the Department of Defense is the most anxiety-producing one. So
yeah. Apropos DoD and their adoption of or the military's adoption, I guess, of Grok as the house AI model. And of course, Grok is the most right-leaning AI model, or the most sort of MAGA-friendly.
I think it's back
model.
with the others this week, but people aren't as mad at it this week.
Yeah, well, certainly in the week of Mecha Hitler, it seemed like an interesting source for military adoption. But let's, apropos that, let's go into the feature of the report that made the most noise in the media, and that was in the first pillar, and that was this idea of limiting woke AI or of limiting ideologically tainted AI output. So,
Right.
can you tell us what the requirement was and how successful you think it can be?
Well, in the first place, part of the Biden administration's executive order was to urge AI firms. There was no teeth in it, but to urge AI firms to examine their models for algorithmic bias and fairness and justice and all those good things. And to the extent that the models, this is a big question with the models. They all tend to end up sounding like California liberals when you press them on different kinds of ideological questions. And the question is reality fundamentally pushing them towards that? They're trained on all the words of the internet. And to what extent is reality reflected in all the words of the internet?
So the word cloud of the internet is a California liberal?
At least the word cloud is a California liberal. That's one hypothesis. It could be the reality itself has a liberal bias, which is Stephen Colbert's conjecture. It could be then that you take whatever biases it gets from the corpus and then you train it and you tell it what it can say and can't say, and that makes it more liberal. And then you put some high-level instructions on it. Now, what we saw was Grok was pretty liberal until they put the high-level instruction in, be as offensive as you want to be, and then it turned into Mecha Hitler. So that high-level instruction can do a lot of work. And they specifically address this, that the training, they want more transparency on training and high-level instructions, which everyone's publishing their system card, that high-level instruction card at this point. But okay, so you get this model that people complain is too liberal. Why is it liberal? What would you have to change to make it less liberal? What does it mean to have a non-ideological model? So if they're only going to contract with non-ideological, they're only going to allow the federal government to buy non-ideological models, what are they looking for? If they're looking for it to not use politically correct terms or something, then that you could use other terms for things. But if they're looking for it to say that Trump won the 2020 election, otherwise it's ideologically biased, then we got a serious problem. That's the Tiananmen Square. Yes, DeepSeek about Tiananmen Square, and it may start to answer and then say it can't answer, or it may just say, there's no information about that. You ask about Xi Jinping's personal life, and it doesn't have an answer for you. But you ask about any other world or historical leader, and it has. So we don't want the model to be, and these models to be non-ideological because they're locked down in a right-wing way, as we saw with Mecha Hitler. Yeah. But if it's something less than that, and if with less teeth, then I don't know if we have to be that worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, by way of background, I guess the poster child of sort of woke AI that the Trump people had in mind is the Gemini fiasco, right, from a couple of years ago, where people asked it to, provide the images of historical American leaders from the 18th century, and it rendered them much more ethnically diverse than they were.
Well, that was an example of changing your system card in a way that you hadn't anticipated all the effects in the same way that Mecha Hitler resulted. And I think that was a tempest in a teapot. I mean, basically they said, if you're asked for faces, be as ethnically diverse as possible, and it wasn't thinking about the use case of a face of, Abraham Lincoln being turned black or something like that. But those are things that are easily fixed, and they fix that immediately. So that is the kind of thing that they're thinking about. They're also thinking about the fact that every time you ask Grok anything about the MAGA worldview that says, no, that's not in fact correct because the evidence is on the other side. If they want that changed, right? How do you change that? Because that's not a high level instruction. That's a matter of, it can have no information about January 6th that did not come out of MAGA,
Right. I mean, I agree with you that substantively it's a tempest in a teapot, but it was very easy to exploit for political purposes because
people were looking for ideological bias. Yeah. And they thought that was an example. It was just an example, poor alignment, as it's called. Yeah, so I think that the woke stuff is extremely concerning. I think that this administration is always looking for a loophole to drive a truck through, and this could be that kind of loophole. And the specific actions that they want to take here are restricting the federal government from giving any funds to states that enact. So they're trying to do an end run around the fact that the AI regulatory moratorium got overwhelmingly defeated when it finally came up in the Senate. Even though it was being pushed by these guys, they wanted the states to be forbidden by the feds to enact any AI regulation, and then Trump wasn't going to enact any. That got defeated, but in this, they're calling for any state, for all the states to be evaluated and whether their regulatory burdens on AI are woke or too restrictive, and they then will not give AI worker training money or AI grants or contract with people who are in those states. And so, that's the kind of scrutiny they're going to use to look at this woke stuff. And that could be quite consequential.
I mean, in a way, to me, this mirrors some of the same absurdity as the administration's attempt to dictate the academic and intellectual agenda of universities. Universities did have a problem with, and to some large extent still do have a problem with ideological bias. That part was correct in some ways.
I'd push back on that.
Okay, but A, it was overblown. And B, it's not like the administration is genuinely committed to objectivity and neutrality or truth as a regulative ideal. All it wanted to do, as is very, very clear, is replace an ideological bias with a worse ideological bias. And, so to get a sort of free speech, academic freedom, intellectual integrity, why don't you be objective argument from an administration that is literally trying to take over university after university to the level of, reaching into departments and telling them what to teach and who to hire, is absurd, is the height of absurdity.
Yeah, okay, so in terms of the cognitive dissonance of the report, the other thing that really stands out is that it calls on the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, the NSF, and the DOC, I forget what that stands for, to prioritize AI skill development, and for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis to study AI's impact on the labor market. How exactly are they supposed to do that when you just cut their budgets? And in the case of the Department of Education, are threatening to completely close them down. So, I mean, to the extent that this addresses regulation, which it really doesn't, and I think that one of the striking things about this is that it still allows characterization that this is a laissez-faire document, fundamentally a laissez-faire document, compared to the European and Chinese approaches. So the European approach of the AI Act says that you should submit high-risk models, frontier models, for prior review. There's a licensure process, and that companies have liability for harms. None of that is in this. There's no liability for companies for any of the harms that they cause. There's no prior approval. There's no licensure process. They just want these federal agencies to study things, but and that's meaningless because they can't do anything right now. They're paralyzed by your cuts. So I think that's all doublethink.
Yeah. Well, so to kind of tie these 2 points together, there's a hypocrisy problem here, I think, that is hard to miss, which is, on the one hand, and this was in J.D. Vance's free speech exhortation or lecture to the Europeans in the early days of the administration as well. If you're going to argue for objectivity and neutrality as a regulative ideal, you need to probably show some actual commitment to it. And this administration in various contexts has not done that. And then the other thing is every single item here has an implementation specification of how it's going to be supervised and executed by a federal agency. And so the agencies who've been tasked by making sure that, things that the administration wants to happen on AI policy actually do happen have been defunded and gutted. So it's a largely bureaucratic document that is being formulated while you've killed the bureaucracy.
Right. To be purely cynical, I think Democrats often write beautiful documents that they want to implement and then can't or don't.
Yeah.
And this seems like one that is a beautiful document that may never be implemented in the ways that would be positive. At any rate, there's some negative things in here.
Yeah. That's actually an important point. Let me ask you a question about that. You know much more about this than I do. I actually think, like I said, that this could have been in some ways a bipartisan document minus the woke AI stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say Democrats often write beautiful documents that can be implemented, often those beautiful documents are drafted for Democrats as well, by lobbyists. And this seems to have been drafted by lobbyists too. So, yeah, I mean, when I read this, I was like, this is kind of DC business as usual. A powerful lobby has just, in this case, the Silicon Valley lobby, has drafted a sort of wildly pro-AI, anti-regulatory document. The administration put the White House seal on it, and that's kind of what always happens, isn't it?
Right. And so I think, the cognitive dissonance around saying that the federal government has to do this and that, and then gutting the federal government is less cognitively dissonant on their side because they don't really want the government doing anything. That's the whole deregulatory push is not to have the government do anything. This relates, by the way, I think to the abundance arguments that Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have put out in their book and that are being debated on the left. Because what they said is, look, the left often wants to do great things like high-speed rail and then can't figure out how to get it done because of the thicket of local regulations and unions and other things. This one clearly has some of that tone when it talks about power center needs. It specifically says that there should be permitting reform so that these power stations and data centers can get built faster and quicker. I think that that's notable that they're focusing on state capacity to push through some of these goals. But as opposed to the Biden administration, where they were actually trying to facilitate the resiting of these, there's no real mechanisms here for encouraging the building of fabs in the United States other than, deregulation.
Actually, apropos fabs, I wanted to ask you about that. It seems to me that the second part of the document, which focuses on the infrastructure and on specifically the power infrastructure, in a way is both the most interesting and the most realistic to implement. And so there what you have is an articulation of the electric power requirements that it is going to take both to train the models. So there's two separate requirements, right? There's the electric power requirement to train a model, which is huge. And then there's the power requirement for the model to actually do the reasoning. So that is actually to do the work of spewing out the information that people keep asking it about. And I just heard a Bloomberg report yesterday that said that really the kind of power needs of the large labs are on the order of magnitude of entire countries. So just Anthropic, for example, needs about the amount of power that New Zealand uses to power the training and the reasoning. So that's going to require a gigantic investment and the fast laning of the use of federal lands to get around zoning, like you were saying.
Yeah, that's especially galling, the notion that we're going to be building giant nuclear power stations on federal lands. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but that seems doable and kind of consistent broadly with Republican policy. That second part there seems practical. And the other thing that I thought that was interesting about this is, people made fun of Trump when he said that, he was going to bring back the auto workers or blue collar jobs. there's going to be, if this happens on the scale that the companies say that they want, there's going to be a ton of blue collar, kind of old fashioned blue collar jobs in the construction and the maintenance of these endless power plants, right?
Yes. I think there is a strong argument for industrial policy on the grounds that you can build good jobs with it. The argument is much stronger in terms of green energy than it is in terms of
And that ain't happening.
yeah, and yes, well, yeah, and I mean that's a shocking part of this as well. The document addresses the need for power and as well as data centers. And it even talks about geothermal, I think, but it doesn't talk at all about solar, which is the fastest growing source of power in the world. And of course, China has become the leader of solar panel production, and its own use of solar has expanded dramatically over the United States. They're using more electricity than we are now. So the fact that it completely skips over investing in good jobs in the green energy economy that would also provide the power necessary for artificial intelligence, among other things. That's shocking. I have been also convinced by people that this power question or the need for as many data centers may be overblown in the sense that DeepSeek showed that architectural changes in how we build these models can get much more efficient models to do things. And as a consequence, you could have far fewer tokens being used in the generation of an answer. Now, the question is, if it gets cheaper, both in terms of energy and cost, then would people then start using it for everything as they already have? And if that's true, then you may still need these giant data centers like Stargate or Star Labs, the one that Elon's building, I think. Yeah. So, I don't know what to think about the building out of these plants. I got asked the other day by someone about the water use, which I think there's a lot of research coming out about how much water gets used in the whole production of the AI cycle, which includes the energy production for it. And some of these places are being sited in water-poor areas in the Southwest. So that's another level of environmental concern. And now we're going to say that they don't have to do environmental approvals anymore to get these things built. So, the whole thing is problematic from that point of view.
Does it give you cognitive dissonance as a social democrat that
I still use ChatGPT?
No, I know that doesn't. It should, but it doesn't. No, the fact that a whole bunch of seemingly well-paying blue-collar jobs are coming down the pike as a result of this program, even though you'd like them to be greener. They didn't exist really for a long time, and now there's a good chance that they will exist.
Doesn't give me pause. I mean, I think every time the government spends $1, it creates some kind of job. And the question is, what kind of jobs can you create with those dollars, and what are the better jobs to create? Mm-hmm. Defense spending creates jobs, but it doesn't create as many jobs as spending in any other part of the federal government. So I'm fine with the fact that this is going to create jobs. I'm fine with the workforce development initiatives in here, with the integration of artificial intelligence into education. By the way, OpenAI just announced the study mode, which you can turn on in ChatGPT. And study mode, instead of giving you an answer for your homework, it gives you enough of information to then have a conversation with it, and it gives you some tests, and it basically becomes a tutor for you. I think there are ways that we can press ahead with that kind of educating people about AI and getting more people in the workforce. Whether that still doesn't address the question.
Study mode has existed for a long time, by the way. Before ChatGPT, it was just called study.
It was just called reading a damn book. Yeah. So I think that their focus.
But I do want to push you on my previous question, because my sense is, I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but my sense is that actually there could be a game-changing strategic number of industrial jobs created by this. So it's not just, sort of government spending on the margin, creating a few jobs.
Well, this partly depends. I mean, the computer science jobs have dried up, right?
Right.
So We know that one of the first
No,
fields
I'm talking about construction and about maintenance.
No, but
like
I'm saying we don't know what's going to happen to the labor market. This is part of what this document does not address is technological unemployment, except insofar as saying that the Department of Labor should keep an eye on it.
Just some hand waving.
Yeah, if we start getting humanoid robots that can do construction work, which may be 5-10 years out, then that would change the situation. But look, I'm not disturbed by the fact that blue-collar jobs will get created by this initiative. And I want them to have unions. I don't think this administration is going to be encouraging, or if they're built in Texas, they're going to be encouraged locally to have unions. I think they should. That's a precondition for them being good quality jobs. And I think we could get better jobs if we were spending it in better ways. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah. But if the jobs are there, they might have unions under the next administration.
Let me make a confession, which is that Trump gave a speech the other day, and he was asked about this AI stuff, and he was asked his position on intellectual property, which is not addressed at all in this document.
Which is really interesting, yeah.
Yeah. And his position was almost word for word what I have been saying for the last 2 years, which gave me great pause. And that is, when you read a book, the things that you learn from it, you don't have to pay someone to use those ideas that you learned from it. That basically, even copyrighted material, it's okay to use the information from it as long as you don't repeat it verbatim. And I've been saying that over and over again. That's Trump's position, apparently, even though they didn't put it in this document. And I think that there is going to be that push to protect AI from the copyright. There is, in fact, a call out to the FTC to look at liability issues that might affect AI, which would be things like holding them accountable for bad things that happen. But there's probably going to be a push from the feds to protect AI from saying that artists have to be paid for if you look at their painting or whatever.
Yeah, we should probably do a separate episode on some of this stuff one day, because I think it's a fascinating question. But just for our listeners to put everyone on the same page, what you're talking about is the AI companies, the AI labs have been pushing for a slackening of intellectual property protection so that they can train their models freely on all the written work that people have done. Publishers increasingly are asking authors to give them permission to use the writing for the training of models. Publishers are also, interestingly enough, especially academic publishers, becoming interested in authors writing longer texts so that the models have more to train on. And so your position is surprisingly that there's something fake about having strong protections that wouldn't let the models train on them because the regular reading process. So explain it a little more, that part.
Well, fair use is as long as you don't quote too much from the original text. And this goes back to the sampling debates, as we talked about with Stephen Marsh. How many notes can you use from a song before you've violated the copyright on that song and things like that? Yeah. There are limits in fair use of how much you can reproduce, and some of these models do have sufficiently accurate memory of the things that they were exposed to that they could reproduce substantial portions of it. So that is a violation of fair use. I agree. But if you ask it for its position on Plato or whatever, and it reads through the 10,000 things it has on Plato and gives you an answer, yes, it's learned from those 10,000 things, but it shouldn't have to pay all of the people that wrote those 10,000 things. Now, Meta specifically has been a bad actor here. Meta stole, I think, 30 million books that were copyrighted, that were in an archive of illegally downloaded books. They just got sued by a porn company for having used 3,000 videos from this porn company to train the video components of what they're doing. So, I mean, there's some very questionable stuff that happens in the training data. And I'm absolutely for legislation which says you should be able to put something on your document or your picture or whatever that says this should not be used in training data. Just as we have robot text, it's robot.txt.
The weakness of this argument that you and your friend President Trump are making is that if I read your wonderful book, Citizen Cyborg, and I learned something from it, which I did and I did, I am not in the process of trying to become J. Hughes when I do that. But the telos of the chatbots is replacing the source material at the end of the day. So if I say, well, shit, everybody who's going to learn about you and I are writing a book now based on our debates in the podcast. And if we say, well, everybody who is getting information about the ethics of technology is in the end, 5 years down the road, going to be getting it from a large language model or from a chatbot anyway. So let it train on our book so at least the chatbot is competent. The telos of that chatbot in the end is to replace people like you and me. And it's, by the way, doing not a bad job already. That's one of the areas where it is making progress. So the chatbot will eventually be able to make its own podcast. Notebook LM is already making progress in that direction, and its podcasts are not terrible. And as we've talked in other contexts, part of the project is replacing instructors by instructional AI agents and so on and so forth. So I guess one could ask or push back against your point in the president's. One could say, am I under any obligation to enable technology that would make me obsolete? And it's more the point of this technology than the older technology of books.
Yeah. And just to point out the irony of Trump talking about the legitimacy of reading books.
I did think about that, right? That is an irony.
Yeah.
But what do you think? I mean, does that not make sense that the telos of the chatbots isn't just to teach people stuff like it was for books?
Yeah. And to put an even sharper point on it, I think we're already there in the sense that there's this huge drop off in click-throughs in Google of search-driven traffic, because the Google AI summary turns out to be satisfactory for 50% of people's queries, and they just never click through to the original sources.
And now they've, by the way, moved to AI mode, which appears on the top left of your Google search, which is an even more advanced version of that.
Right. Okay. So this is, to the extent that this is a social problem, I of course think that all human labor should eventually be replaced, and we should all take a very long vacation. So I'm not sure this is a huge problem. But to the extent that this is a social problem...
this is the problem with Buddhists not being afraid to die. You're like fine with very long vacations.
To the extent that this is a huge problem, is the solution the intellectual property and litigiousness around intellectual property right? I'm not sure it is. I think that I think it's, what is it, Finland or Denmark? Some European country just gave copyright to everybody for their face as a way to prevent deepfakes. Which silly. I think, okay, so you find your face has been deepfaked someplace, and you can sue the person who did that because they used your copyrighted image of your face. I think there's going to be some weird edge cases there. What if they take your face and they mix it with 10 million other faces to come up with the homogeneous white guy face? Mm-hmm. Do you still have a claim to the fact that you and those other 10 million people should be paid for the use of white guy face? That's the question that we're facing right now. It's like, yes, they looked at all the white guy faces. They came up with a generic white guy face. You were a part of that, but do you have any claim in terms of intellectual property to the result? I don't think you do.
Yeah. I guess my own, I think that's a very good analogy, actually. I guess my own sense is, since I am not convinced about the bona fide nature of the technology itself and what it wants to do, I am absolutely comfortable with putting sticks in the spokes of its wheel by trying to prevent it from getting access to my intellectual property.
And this is what I'm confronting in Luddite techno-ethics debates all the time, which is that people grasp at every single anti-technology or anti-corporate argument that they can possibly utilize because they don't like where the things are heading. It's like, I understand that you don't like where things are heading, but there are better ways and worse ways to fight things. I'm not sure this is the right way. If your concern is that artists are going to find a hard time making a living in the future, and my wife is very concerned about that as an artist, then I think there are other ways to think about how to do that other than trying to fiddle with how we deal with copyright. And in a way that probably won't even work because we're in this international competitive market. China's models have no compunction. You know, you ask ChatGPT to make a Disney knockoff or something like that, and sometimes it'll do things that are copyrighted, but occasionally it'll say, no, I can't because of, copyright. I can't make that kind of an image. China doesn't have any of that. So we're going to have models in the world that will do whatever you ask them to do.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's, and I guess we're straying from the document.
I brought it back to China.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have stuff to say about that and about the motivation of people to be writing when the large language models are using their writing as fodder for their training. But let me take you back to the document so that we don't kind of lose focus completely. Why do you think, I mean, that's kind of a glaring omission right there. Why do you think they didn't cover intellectual property, which is key for training the models, which is key for their competence?
I don't know. I'm sure David Sachs and his ilk would have preferred that the administration take a more forceful stance against, in favor of the fair use interpretation of AI training data.
Yeah.
But as I was beginning to suggest, I think there are solutions to people's concerns that do not involve saying that reading a book, that you have to pay people every time you read a book, and that involves things like putting markers on documents and images that say this should not be used in training data. Now, or not negotiating access to your archives or whatever they are, like the New York Times. And every publisher should be asked, can we use your documents to train? And if they're not, then they shouldn't. But we're not in that situation yet because we haven't created the legislative or regulatory framework to do that. Well, the situation we were in was people were building data sets out of stuff that they found and then training AI in it for 15 years before this issue came up when they became suddenly very powerful. Now, it's not, I understand that it's a concern, and I understand the human consequences and costs that people see in terms of artists' livelihood or writers' livelihoods. I still think, and this gets back to where we're arguing about the future of work, I still think that there will be enjoyment to be found in writing and creating art, and enjoyment to be found in appreciating other people's writing and art. But that also one of the things I would like is to make sure that my works are all eaten by every AI out there, so that if anyone ever asks about who J. Hughes was and what he thought, it will have an informed opinion about that. And so I don't want to put markers on my work that say, please do not ever acknowledge me in the history of human thought.
That's interesting, because the point of it training on your work is not so much acknowledging you, but actually being able to say something competent about the kind of things that you wrote about. And that's right where I think it's going to go. And one has to have a particularly mature ego to to be okay with the latter at the expense of the former, right?
Yeah, well, I never made that much money off my book, so.
Yeah. Well, like I said, my sense is we probably have to have a separate episode to fight about copyright. I do want to ask you about China, though.
China, go ahead.
Like the last part, the AI diplomacy part. Let me regale you with a historical analogy and tell me if it has anything that's applicable to our own situation here. So the China policy is not super coherent because it's like, on the one hand, in a stated level, very protective and very adversarial. And on the other hand, like we said, the whole thing is advocating open source models, etc., right? So a year after the end of World War II, Secretary of War Henry Stimson comes up to the president and says in a meeting, I think we should share the nuclear secrets with the Soviets. And, some of the people in the room say something like, that's crazy. Stalin is a maniac, and Stimson writes this famous memo, and he says, a long career in public service has taught me that the only way to make a untrustworthy person trustworthy is to trust them. And so he was advocating sharing the nuclear secrets with the Soviets, and that proposal was rejected, I think, by a relatively narrow margin, and of course could have changed the course of history. And you can understand the pushback, given that Stalin was insane and that the stakes were very, very high. And so, but that was that episode. I've always thought that when it comes to AI, Stimson's kind of proposal is far more reasonable because the stakes are lower. And because, as we saw with the development of DeepSeek, whether legally or illegally, the kind of cross-pollination is already there anyway. Do you think that could be, is that coherent as a sort of AI diplomacy policy? And could it ever evolve into something like that under this administration?
Transnational regulation of AI, is that what you're talking about?
Collaboration with it.
At least collaboration.
Yeah.
I think collaboration with the obvious way to control future AI risks is U.S.-China collaboration, and I hope the EU is a part of that as well. I mean, we have most of the tech titans. I would just point out that one of the big differences between the U.S. and China is that our tech titans basically bought the U.S. government, or half of it, and are doing with it as they please. And Xi Jinping decided, 5-6 years ago that tech titans in China were not going to have that kind of leeway, and he sent some of them to the labor camps, and he's basically asserted the dominance of the state over AI development, all tech development, and certainly the development of tech titans. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, I would prefer that result. I would prefer it in the EU way. The EU was able to do it because the EU doesn't have tech titans, and so they were basically legislating against American tech titans, which everyone was on board with. But if they had had their own tech titans, it might have been harder sell. But at any rate, your question about China is, should we have international regulation? That was China's immediate response out of the box to the Trump AI action plan, was that they gave a press conference and they said, well, what we want is international cooperation on the regulation of AI risk. And China, and before them, the Soviet Union, have always been for international regulation of various things that the U.S. was like, oh yeah, we know what's going to happen. You're going to get in there and you're going to be anti-American. You're going to get a bunch of other countries to be anti-American. And that's probably what they want here, is they want the rest of the world to chime in and say, you know what? We don't like all that gay propaganda coming out of your AIs. We want that kind of thing to be regulated too. We kind of agree with this anti-woke stuff that your president came up with. So yeah, I think there's serious risks in an international direction, and this is why international cooperation has always been problematic. In the end, it'll depend on how proximate we think the risks are. Nuclear weapons has been a much more proximate risk, weapons of mass destruction, bioweapons, and we still don't have international effective regulation. So,
yeah, well, I mean, like Stimson was told in 1946, it's harder to trust your enemies with a doomsday weapon than it is, my sense would be, with something like AI, which is, some of the people working on it like to think about it as a doomsday weapon, but it's really a weapon that can't tell you how many R's there are in the word strawberry yet. So, I think it's not yet a doomsday weapon. But my sense is, actually, going back to your previous point about the construction of power plants, my sense is that, practically speaking, the alternative to collaborating with the Chinese on co-development and co-regulation is that we're going to put a shitload of money into creating power plants, which is going to subsidize the development of their cheap models. Because what's going to happen is what happened again with DeepSeek. We're going to pay for the infrastructure. They're going to rip off the result and improve it. Then we're going to have to put off even more money in the infrastructure to best their revised version, and on it will go. That doesn't seem like a very plausible economic cycle to me.
Well, that's like complaining, we gave China lots of money and they gave us lots of stuff, and we didn't get, we didn't get jobs out of it. It's like, yeah, but you got lots of stuff. And like if the result is that we do innovation and we have built power plants that allow us to use these AI tools, but it turns out that the best AI tools are Chinese. I mean, as long as we make sure that they're not sending data back to Beijing or whatever, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad result. I mean, What if the best models came out of France? I wouldn't care.
Well, no, but I'm talking specifically about the DeepSeek cycle and that dynamic, which is that was built on a substantial American investment, right? And then which was tweaked. And
they
then
deny
you have
that, but I think there's evidence for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's something. Well, they deny a lot of things, but that's a pretty lopsided dynamic. Doesn't it make much? I mean, just from an economic standpoint, it would make more sense to co-invest in infrastructure if you could figure that out. Thinking like Trump, transactionally, that would seem to be a much better deal.
Well, and this gets back to, is China, I mean, is any of the trade war that we have with China legitimate? To the extent that China has always had hugely burdensome constraints on American or foreign investment in China, and, that it had to be 51% Chinese owned, and you could be subject to, being accused of being a spy and thrown in prison, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's going to be hard to convince investors and tech firms to go back into China on those grounds. Although I guess Elon's still there making Teslas. But I think that China has some work to do to convince people that they could be a trustworthy player in the field. And because they are so deeply embedded in military stuff in their development, as we are as well. I mean, all of our Silicon Valley came out of defense contracting, and now we're just kind of finally acknowledging that with Palantir and all the other Silicon Valley folks who want to become new defense contractors. So to the extent that there's nationalism, defense interests, national security interests on both sides, it's hard to imagine, and the kind of hostility to foreign investment in China, it's hard to imagine much more cooperation coming out of this relationship. But Europe, I think, the real place that I think things should be pushed is in Europe, because Europe could find the resources to hire a lot of the American scientists and computer scientists and others who are being disenfranchised by this new regime. And they need to invest in technological independence, not interdependence with the United States. They already realized when Trump was more hostile to Ukraine a couple months ago, they realized, oh, you know what? We can't launch nuclear weapons. Like the British nuclear weapons have to be launched in coordination with the Americans. Only the French nuclear weapons can be launched by the French. The spying apparatus and spy satellite network, they were completely dependent on American resources. So they need their own intellectual architecture in Europe, and they should be developing their own AI industry as well. So I think that's really where I would be hoping for things to develop. Not so much with U.S.-Chinese cooperation. But to the extent that we see big AI risks coming out of things, military conflicts that are implicated with AI, we may be able to get them included in the arms negotiations that we have on other things as well. Yeah.
I guess given last week's breathtaking appeasement of Trump by the Europeans in the trade talks, I'm not seeing them develop any independent. That they had a choice, but I'm not seeing them develop any independent AI policy. But hope springs
I'm enough
eternal.
Of a Europhile to push back a little bit. The fact that they gave away too much. But they gave away less on their terms than Trump said that they gave away. This is the way Trump usually deals with these things. He talks about something at the table with the other partner, and then he comes out and says, oh, yeah, they agreed to do X, and they never agreed to do X. The whole European trade deal was smoke and mirrors from that point of view. But at any rate, the Europeans have not covered themselves in valor, except to the extent that they want to sever the defense, or they want to be more independent in terms of defense contracting, and that would be very significant in this AI sphere as well.
Yeah. Well, sir, we seem to have improved greatly on the AI action plan. I think an honest day's work has been done.
Well, I'm going to give this video immediately to ChatGPT so that it will be preserved for posterity.
They just, tell it to sort of block out everything I said. All right.
Okay, sir.
See you next time.
You too.